Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Psychic Perspectives with my lovely Sarah. She's got beautiful dew going on there today.
Thank you.
We are going to be talking about, you called it divination tools. I called it psychic tools. But anyway, people tend to think of pendulums and cards and maybe Ouija boards, but there are so many different tools out there.
Yes.
That's what I really wanted to talk about. So what inspired you to say, hey, let's talk about this?
Well, I guess it was just kind of a thing we haven't touched on yet,
We
but I was
haven't.
thinking
Yeah,
about it and I'm like, wow, there's so many different types of
there
divination
are.
tools.
Right. Right.
It would be a good thing to discuss and just kind of maybe give people some tips on which ones they might be more drawn to and what to expect and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people get hung up though. They think divination tools, or they think, oh, I'm going to foretell the future. But I'm like, we need to look at these tools as really having a much broader use than that. I mean, you can use them for a developmental tool. You can use them for, like a
Yes.
one-on-one session. You can use them for yourself. But I do think that there's some warnings and some cautions and some tips and tricks. And that's kind of why we wanted to talk about that today.
Yes.
So when you use the word divination, so let's get started with that, right? Let's get down to the nitty gritty. And it's
Okay.
like, I hate that word. I like calling it a psychic tool because if we look at the word divination, we think fortune telling, right? And I get
Mhm.
hung up on words a lot. So
Yeah.
when you hear divination tool, how do you define that?
Uh, for me, I like to say divination tools because that's precisely what it is. I mean, you're asking for, I guess it's confirmation from the divine or from spirit, and it's using a specific tool. Yes. So, I mean, you could call it a psychic tool just as easily, but is that not the same thing? I mean, I
Well,
don't
I mean,
know.
I think you bring up a good point. And it was funny when I started doing some of the research for the show today, I thought, well, let me look up what divination actually means. And it's really very interesting because there is a lot of different definitions depending on what resource you use. So, for example, Wikipedia said it's to foresee, to foretell, to predict, to prophesy, related to divine, or to be inspired by God. Now, I really like the second part of that, right? Because we're
Yeah.
looking for information. So here's another definition from Merriam-Webster. It's the art or practice that seeks to foresee or foretell future events. Again, I'm not a fan of that too much, but it says, or discover hidden knowledge. And I think when we're using these divination tools, it's really what we're looking for. We're looking for knowledge. We're looking for insight. Yeah,
Right.
sure, a lot of people want to know the future, but ultimately we're asking questions about ourselves or for another person. So I think it depends on your intention there. But and then
Yeah.
the
Big
last
time.
one, the Bible dictionary actually had a really interesting one too. It said communication with the deity for the purpose of determining the deity's knowledge, resulting in clarification of a decision or discernment of the future. Honestly, that was, like I said, that was from the Bible dictionary. That was my favorite.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I thought it was
crazy.
actually much more accurate than the Wikipedia Merriam-Webster.
Right.
I will say to people, though, that Wikipedia and Merriam-Webster are definitely biased. If Wikipedia does not acknowledge parapsychology, psychic phenomenon, there's actually the Psi Encyclopedia, which is all pro, all of this kind of stuff. It's very scientific based. But anyway, so
Right.
those are just some of those definitions there. I think we can get hung up on those words, but I don't want people to think that it's about future. It's really just about discerning information.
Right.
So, what do you feel based on all of this? What's a proper use of intuitive and psychic tools? And is there any improper use? What's your opinion about that?
Um, well, I think you need to have some sort of parameters, rules, and a goal in mind when you're going to use any, I guess, divination tools. Um, and I think that's the basis of how they work, is that you have to have some kind of reason. So whether or not that's validation for yourself, I feel like you kind of need to already have a hunch on, what it is that you think is going to be the answer. And then it kind of validates more so than it does predict the future. Does that make sense? Because for me, tarot cards and stuff like that, they they basically show the current energies right now. And it helps you get a different perspective because it's like somebody else telling you from the outside in, hey, this is where you're messing up, or this is where you're doing really good and you need to focus on these things. So, but it depends on what your question is. It depends on how you're trying to validate what it is that you think you already know or what you feel like you need to know. And so, for example, like with there's like rose petal readings. Like I have no idea how they decipher the rose petal itself,
or tea leaves. Exactly.
Right. Or to tell you, hey, you're going to get that job that you've really wanted this last month or whatever. I don't know the logistics on that, but you have to have a preset of rules or parameters that you use to decipher that.
And every tool is different, right? And that's the part of learning that tool and what are the tool's limitations, and how can you positively use that? I think that's a really good point that I hadn't thought of. Yeah, you do need to know how to use the tool. And we're going to get through a wide range of different options that you hear that you can use. And some of the things that we do know from our experience, obviously, like you said, I don't know anything about tea leaves or, we had put this question out in a group and somebody had said, reading ice cubes. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. I've never even heard of that.
Right. So with the ice cube thing, I guess it could be done, because I'm not going to say that it can't be, for one thing. But you would have to set a certain just guideline on how you're reading that ice cube. So these lines mean this and bubbles mean that. And, if it cracks or something like that, like you would have to have these certain set of parameters to say, this is what that means. And then you go in and you do the reading and you get your information.
Well, we'll talk about that some more as we go through the tools. And I think you bring up a good point that I was going to bring up later, but since you brought it up, we'll do it now. It's like, there can be the literal meaning of something. Like you said, you've got parameters, right? So when you look at somebody's palm, this line means this, and this line means that, and this line means this. That's a very literal interpretation. Or let's say you have a deck of cards. It comes with an associated book. You look at the book whenever you draw the card and you read exactly what's in the book. That's what I call a literal interpretation. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's a second option there. And that is what I call the free flow interpretation. And that is where you simply allow yourself to be drawn to say and inspired, whatever it is. If you see something on somebody's palm and it reminds you of a tree, then, but that's not the literal interpretation. I still think you need to run with that, because that could still be very valid. Does that make sense? It could be.
Sure. Absolutely. Using your intuition on top of your set parameters.
Yes. And so that was why I said, is there a proper use and intent for the tool? I think we need to look at, I've been to people who've read cards and all they're doing is, laying the tarot out, telling me what they mean. Not to say that they're not accurate, but is there anything psychic in that process? Well, that's a whole nother discussion. It could just be the energy that's causing it, but the person that's pulling the cards may have no psychic abilities whatsoever. Right.
Okay. I'm going to say this right now. So when I first started out in tarot, I used to try to get the person, or I would get whatever question and then give my answer first before I laid out the cards. And then the cards would speak for themselves, because they do in very many cases. You don't even have to be psychic or have a lick of talent in that department to use tarot cards and to get something out of it.
You're making my point. I completely agree.
Right.
Yes.
But if you do, and you have that intuition, that just, it adds to it. And then half the time it can literally validate what you've already said to your sitter. And it's kind of a double whammy that way.
Perfect. And that's an example right there of, it's like we used the literal interpretation of the card, which really required no psychic ability whatsoever. But then you added your own psychic without a tool, but you can be psychic with the tool.
Right.
And that's the other thing. And again, we'll kind of get through that as we move through it. Cards, I think, are a great example where you simply are looking at a card and you're not giving the literal interpretation, but you're drawn to images and thoughts and emotions and feelings that card creates inside of you. Then you give that information, and then that becomes kind of this psychic interpretive type of process. So it's
Right.
very different.
Which I think is a lot like scrying is that way. And you can use multiple things to scry.
Absolutely.
Like one of our friends was talking about water scrying.
Right.
And to me, that's a very straight up intuitive way, because you are literally looking at something and you're trying to, see what's in it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Yeah. And I just go back to what you had made about when you started doing the cards. It was funny because I went to a psychic fair a couple of months ago and a gal was reading cards and she clearly had no psychic ability whatsoever. Right. It was fine. But it was like, she would lay the cards out and then I felt like she was fishing. Right. I felt like she was trying to get me to give her information. And I'm thinking, it's your job to give me information. So she was just going with the literal interpretation of the card, but I could tell that there was just nobody home as far as her connection was concerned. Now, what was really interesting is about 3 or 4 weeks later, the cards were right.
Yeah.
The cards were right. And I look back at that now and I went, oh my gosh, I know exactly now what she was talking about. It actually took more like 2 months to come forward. So it didn't make her wrong.
Right.
Because somehow the energy that's, like you said, that's in the space, the energy that's in the atmosphere, the energy that was surrounding me, right? Because I drew the cards. I was the one that created that from my energy, from my space. That's this very woo-woo type of thing, but it was still right. Yeah. But she had no intuitive insight in regard to the card. She was simply walking me through the process. So it doesn't negate
there's lots of ways
value.
There's lots of ways to get intuitive insight through the cards. And
absolutely,
typically I would say it's, no, there's a ton of ways, but numerology,
right. And we're
astrology,
exactly.
Yeah, that all goes into it. And also just interpreting feelings and things that you get from the pictures. All decks are usually done very beautifully, and they all have something that you can pull from them.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so those are just some good examples. It's like I said, we'll talk about cards later, but here we are talking about them. I know. I think it's just because it's really one of the quintessential tools that we can use, either for the literal interpretation or for the intuitive side of it, for that interpretive process. But the other thing that I said about proper use and intent of psychic tools, I think what I also meant behind that, and see if you agree with this, is do it for the right reasons, right? Let's just go. I don't want to get into the Ouija board discussion because we've talked about it in other episodes, but you just want to sit down and you want to connect because you want to see if it's cool. You want to know when the love of your life is coming. I understand that these questions are important and we want to have those experiences. But I think we also need to be careful about what we're inviting and what we're asking to happen. So that's what I meant by having that right mindset. Don't you agree?
Yeah, these tools are not toys.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
I think a lot of people get the wrong idea when everybody's like, oh, it's for entertainment purposes only. You can take it with a grain of salt and it can be very entertaining. But if you're going to be attempting these things on your own, it should not be taken lightly. It should be very respectful. These are ancient tools. You're dealing with spirit, and you should have an intention, like I said, about what it is that you're after as far as information, either for yourself or for your sitter.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. So I know, especially for me, because I'm skeptical, Carol, right? So it's like I've had a period of time where I've been really hesitant to use tools because can we really rely on them? That's the next question that I want to say, because some people are like, and we'll talk about this as we go through some of the list of tools, is the Ideomotor Effect, which is what happens with the pendulum or a Ouija board. And that's basically, or even a dowsing rod. And that's where basically these subtle movements that our body creates based off of subconscious thoughts. And people say, well, that's not really psychic. It's just your subconscious, which is called the Ideomotor Effect. It's, you can actually Google that, and I'll put how to spell that down below so you can research that. And so I thought, oh, I can control my pendulum. I can make it swing any way I want to swing, which is true. So because of that, does that mean that the tools don't work and they're really just a byproduct of us? Can we rely on them? When and how?
There has to be a certain level of detachment. For that particular reason, I do not like using the pendulum for myself a lot of times. This is my pendulum, by the way.
Oh, pretty. Very nice.
So again, with establishing the parameters, you want to establish like what is yes and what is no.
Right.
And then you want to detach from the answer.
And that's the hard part, is the detachment. So do you find it easy for you to detach?
No. Just being honest.
Me either, which is why I don't use it.
Right. So I find that with the pendulum, it's I doubt it sometimes, because I'm like, am I influencing it? Did I do that?
Exactly.
So I really, if I'm going to use the pendulum for myself, I have to either really not care about the answer, or really work to get into that detached state of mind where it's like, whatever it is, it is.
Exactly. No.
And so
true. So true.
I think that's the main thing with things like pendulums, where it could be influenced, or like the dowsing rods. I don't use dowsing rods, just because I don't have any. But I guess if I was going to use them, it's the same idea. You need to have your space clear as well, meaning, I've created this sacred space in order to do this work and ask these questions and get these divine answers, et cetera, et cetera. That way there isn't any weird, like negative or just outside influence that you don't want. And yeah, I guess it could be. I don't know that you could influence the cards too, but I feel like it's harder because there's so much.
I agree.
More.
I think cards can be tougher, which is why I think I like them so much.
I think so too. I feel like it's more accurate for me anyways, not being able to detach from what I want the answer to be versus the cards that like to slap you in the face and be like, hey,
but I think it's important, like you said, to be aware of the tool that you're using and the parameters, because if we ask there's nothing wrong with critical thinking. I discovered early on, I'm too busy controlling the sway of the pendulum that I started to realize I just don't know if this is a very reliable tool for me. Now, I have a friend that I know, she does wonderful work, and 90% of her work is done, using a pendulum, and it's amazingly accurate. But she has a whole process for detaching herself. She is not preconceived about what the answers are. She connects with spirit. She does a lot of clearing. She's doing a lot of work, and she has worked with her pendulum. It's truly become a tool for her, for guiding her. And that's great if that's what you want to do, but don't just pick it up, ask it a question. Am I going to find the love of my life next week? Or is the love of my life Steve? And then the next thing you know, it says yes, but subconsciously you want Steve to be the love of your life. And so you influence the pendulum, and it doesn't make it accurate. It makes it responsive to you.
Right.
And so that's what we're saying by, setting up and knowing those parameters and using the tool appropriately, because you can't rely on it if you start finding you have a lot of inaccurate answers. And I think that was another point too, is,
you want to create like words are escaping me today. You want to create a what is the word? It's a constant. So you're like, this is what is yes, and this is what means no. Or some people choose like the clockwise way is
Well, that's
yes,
true,
and
but
the
you can still influence that if you want the answer to be yes to something. You know, if you have this strong subconscious desire for something, even if you feel
right.
clear, your subconscious
Well, that's
wants
true.
it.
That's true either way. But I'm just saying, like, those are the parameters that I'm talking about too,
Right.
is like create a set of this means yes, this means no, this means maybe, et
I get
cetera, so
that.
that
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can kind of, I guess, work it out. But with cards, it's a little different.
It is. And we'll
Um,
talk about each of the tools and some of the limitations as we move on. I think the point is just be careful that you understand, don't make things fit. And ultimately, your tool should stand the test of time, right? So if you're using the pendulum to answer questions for other people, it's a good way for you to not know the answers. And so let's say I started using my pendulum and I started getting a lot of accuracy by using it with other individuals. It's standing the test of time, it's standing up to the validation, and you may
yeah,
have a good process that works for you. So you kind of have to test that tool and make sure that it's really working and giving you good, valid, strong answers. So that's, I guess, what I'm saying is if you're going to
right. You
use
can
it, go
test
with it.
it. You can test it too. You ask just like questions you already know the answer to make sure that it's on par.
Yeah, but that
Um,
doesn't detach you from the fact that your subconscious already knows the answer. That's the whole point. Because if the subconscious
yeah,
controls
but
it,
well, you establish that, I guess, the way that it goes, and then
that's a
you
parameter, but that doesn't make it accurate.
well, that's how you're, I guess, that's how you start, right? And
It is
then
how you start.
the
Yeah,
detachment part, that's on your own. That's on you. You have to be
it
the one that
does. It
detaches. So
does. It does. It does. And we'll,
yeah,
like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Just some things for people to kind of take a look at, though.
right.
All right. So let's get into a list of the tools. Since we're talking about pendulums, I think we've already really discussed that. You've shown people your pendulum. And I think one of the things that I really like, and I'm going to show you this really cool book. I'm sorry to say that it's already actually out of print.
I
Um,
know.
but but getting some pendulum books like this, for example, was Keep It Simple, Stupid. It was all for pendulums. It was
A
by Betsy
sweetheart,
Brown.
not
I,
stupid.
I absolutely love this. But what she did was is she created a series of charts. And each
Oh,
one of these charts does something different. Like here's the
right.
yes, no that you were talking about, right?
Yes. Yep.
She has a list in here of flowers, of angels, of words. Um, Here's another one that's an alphabet. So these are things that you can actually
Oh,
create yourself. And so what you would do is you would start by putting your pendulum here. And then
right.
as you would ask a question, you would allow it to swing in a particular direction. You can actually even create one and do it a whole 360 if you want a little wider. So, I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do to getting this to asking questions, not just these yes and no's and that kind of stuff.
Right.
This was
Right.
really super creative. What I also like about her book, and again, if you really are interested in pendulums, I would say, go out there and see if you can't find a couple of good pendulum books. Is I'm going to get in here real quick. Oh, she also had chakras. That was a great one as well.
Yeah.
She talks about the very things you talked about. She has clearing protocols. She
Oh
has
yeah.
ways that you can actually test and determine whether or not you are clear. You can actually ask the pendulum, am I clear and ready to work? And the pendulum will
Right.
tell you yes or no. If the pendulum tells you no, you're not ready to ask a question. So you need to detach and you need to go further. And this is why this
Right.
becomes a tool now, right? It's not just,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to ask a question. Ha, 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 ha. If
Right.
your
Right.
pendulum's telling you you're not ready, you need to meditate more. You need to get more detached.
More detached, I was going to say, is probably your problem.
You need to clear yourself from whatever it is the question that you're asking, and it may not be a good time for you to ever ask that question. So this is
Right.
what you mean by those parameters. Now I want to
Yes.
go back to that Ideomotor effect that I talked about, because we talked about that a lot in the parapsychology classes, and people said, those things don't work because it's the ideomotor effect. And I thought, but wait a minute, I have an argument for that. Okay. If psychic information hits us and we perceive psychic information and then are unable to interpret that, Why wouldn't that psychic information affect the subconscious, which then allows us to have a response in a tool like a pendulum? Why can't it be psychic? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yes, of course it can still work. If our body is a tool, our body is the ultimate tool. Obviously, this is the ultimate psychic tool. But if I am psychic, and we all are, even if we know it or not, if the information we ask hits the subconscious and affects the pendulum, then what's the difference? There isn't one. So it throws the whole ideomotor effect right out the window as far as I'm concerned.
Right, right.
But you have to be asking yourself which subconscious thoughts are affecting the pendulum. Is it my own and my own subconscious desires, or is it the greater insight from God, the greater clarity?
For
which
me,
us?
I'm just not disciplined, I don't think, enough to use the pendulum for myself.
Exactly.
So,
But am I explaining the differences though, as to how those two things can work?
I think so. I just think that in the example, it's like for other people, I can do it. For myself, it's a little bit different. And I think that's where
but when you're doing it for other people, that's the whole point. It's hitting you at a psychic level. Your subconscious gets the answer.
Yeah, but is it not their energy? It's their energy now that you're asking about. It's their energy, not yours.
Exactly. And so you're connecting with that and interpreting with that. But again, then that could come, are you connecting with them? And if they have this strong desire for Steve to be their love of their life, if you're connecting with that energy, is that then answering the question, which is why people often say, if you really want good answers, take it above the level of your sitter, right? Take it to the next level, take it to the divine level, take it to the greater cosmic wisdom level, because that's where you want to get the answer from. That's where the truth lies. The truth isn't in you or in your sitter, right? Because we have agendas, we have intentions. It's that cosmic level that we want to connect with. That's what most people who do this work, mediumship, channeling, anything, it's like, I can read you, but ideally I want to get it from a higher source, because that has more of the awareness,
accuracy.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so I just throwing that out there, that yes, you can argue about the ideomotor effect, and that moves us into Ouija boards. And even dowsing rods. It's the same kind of thing. People say, well, it's not valid because your subconscious is actually what's creating the movement. I don't think that that is always the case. And I think that people need to be really careful, aware of the limitations, but if used properly, it has enormous potential.
Right. Yeah. I like to use stuff like that more as like validation than.
And see, that's the last thing I would use it for, because I'm just afraid that I'm contaminating it. So, but it depends on the person, because I know lots of people who've used Ouija boards and have gotten some amazing validation out of it and used it to be very, very helpful tools. I do have a set of dowsing rods, as you were talking about. I actually make these. And so this is a nice small one. I mean, the idea behind a dowsing rod, of course, is that you hold it in your hand. Dowsing has been around forever. You can go to dowsing organizations. They're just massive. This is a very ancient technique, not just for finding water, but for finding minerals, for finding lost people. Depends again on what your intention is, what you want to connect with. So the question is the rod finding it, or is the body sensing it? And then it's being manifested in the rod through these movements. And just like the pendulum, people generally will say, well, open is my yes, crossed is my no, or vice versa. It's different for everyone.
Right. That's why, making your own rules beforehand,
learning how it works. We've used these in development circles and practice groups, and to like sense people's auric fields. So if you're walking towards someone and wherever their energy is then you'll start noticing it to go out. And then what you can do is you can ask people to make pull their energy in and see if the dowsing rods can detect whether the energy field of that person is expanding or contracting. So it's a kind of a fun little exercise you can use with the dowsing rod. So
interesting.
Yeah, there's some fun things you can do with it. You also talked about scrying, and I thought that that was a really good one. I bought this for fun. It's just my little crystal ball somebody gave
Oh,
me as a
cool.
gift, and I've never
That's really
used it for
pretty.
scrying per se. It's just one of those things that I happen to have. But
Hmm.
there was somebody in your group that mentioned scrying with water.
Yeah,
Scrying is very common with a mirror.
right.
Uh,
I think it's any really either smooth surface or like the crystal ball, anything that you can kind of, it's like you're honing in on it and then you're allowing these things to come into your mind, or you're allowing these things to
mhm.
manifest, I guess is the word.
Right. And you may feel things when you look at it. You may get images. It's scrying technically is supposed to be seeing. So the idea
Right.
is that you're seeing something, but I mean, what you see, could it be an internal signal? It
I
might
don't
not
know.
just be
For me,
external.
I've done it on like a dark surface, and
Hmm.
honestly, what I saw for myself was kind of it was more like faces, where it was almost like my own face
Your
was
face
morphing
morphs, right?
right
Right.
into like I was seeing like my dad or my grandma, and
Right.
I was like, huh. I was like, but is that just because I kind of look like them, so
Right.
I
Well,
don't
and
know,
that
but
leads to the question, it's like, is it hallucination or imagination, or is it really them? And it's a fun
yeah.
thing. It's a fun thing to do and to experiment with.
I have not done I just haven't done it, honestly. I've done it a couple times. I know the concepts. Um,
Right.
it's just not a tool that I would gravitate to for myself. And
Right.
maybe that's because I'm already very visual internally. Um, that I don't seek that as like an outside
Me
tool.
either. And I'm not sure too many people scry anymore, but I agree with that, and if somebody wants to try it, I think the idea, of course, is that you can just sit in front of a mirror in a darkened room, and then you basically look at your own face, and a lot of people say, well, that's just your eyes playing tricks on you. And it could be, but it could also be an inspired type of thing.
That's
Um,
what generally it's supposed to. It's like an inspired thing. So when, like I
right.
said, I saw, oh, I could see my dad or I could see my grandma. Like, eh, you know, is that typical of what people see? I don't know. That's what I saw. So,
Right. And we did this. I was in a development circle, it was an amazing development circle. And we actually did this exercise as a part of our development circle. We actually sat, I was in a chair, you would be in a chair, and we sat knee to knee. So we're literally facing each other. We darkened the room, and the whole goal was simply to stare into the eyes of the person across from us from a period of time. And I don't
mhm.
remember how long we did it for. It was, and you get into a meditative state and you just stay watching. And the interesting thing that came out of this is almost all of us saw the same person.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
one of the people in the circle, it was their guide.
Oh, that's really cool.
Blew us all away. Now, this is
Hmm.
something that if you do it by yourself, you'll go, wow, that was just kind of interesting, but did I make it up? But if you're in
Right.
a group and environment and we're all seeing the same thing,
That's much, much
that has a lot
more.
more impact to it. So that was
Yeah.
really very, very fascinating. So it's not to
Hmm.
say that there wasn't something to it. So as soon as we all described it, the one person says, I know exactly who that is. That's my guide, and blah, 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 blah. And
Huh.
so we all, of course, thought that was just crazy. So scrying can be a process. You can find different ways to utilize it. If you have a sitter and you just want to sit across from them, and even right now, if I just wanted to sit and just focus on you, do you see something? So
Well,
again,
I've
just
done
another
that.
tool.
Where that was like actually the first time I ever saw someone's aura, was because I was told to stare directly at the middle of their forehead, and you just kind of like allow your vision. I don't know. You just like intently stare, and then
Sure.
all of a sudden, it was like their aura just popped out, and I was like, "Whoa!" And I could see it really good. Um, and when I described it, they were like, "Yeah." So I mean, because they kind of already had an idea of what color their aura was,
Right,
but
right.
other than that, there wasn't a lot of validation for it. But I could see it, so I was like, and I was really shocked. Like I was not expecting to see anything.
Right.
I didn't know even like, I guess, what to
You're just
expect.
calm,
So
you're just focused, you're allowing visual information to come through, and that's what popped for you. And it could be a face, it could be something else. So again, these are fun things to do and to try, especially if you're in a development group or a practice group or something like that. Every one of these tools can be amazing ways for you to practice and just kind of expand on your psychic
yeah, just kind
repertoire,
of see
so to
what
speak.
happens.
Kind of
Just
see
see
what
what happens.
happens, because you don't know. If you start focusing and you start seeing auras, you've just learned a new skill set, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why not give it a shot?
Yeah, definitely.
There's a couple of other things which I'm going to mention very briefly, whether or not you can use them for a divination tool. But there's things like table tipping, where people will get together and they will ask a table a question, and then the energy of the environment or a spirit is supposed to come through and answer that. We've seen people table tipping as a form of communication and connection. So there's that particular option as well. There's little things called spinner wheels and Egley wheels. And I don't know if you're familiar with those, but that's kind of more of a PK tool. So again, I got this as a gift. And basically you have this stand, and then you have this very, very light device, and you put it on top of that. And the whole point is you basically, I would recommend putting it under glass or something where you can't affect it with your breath. But the whole point is to get it to move.
Okay.
Right? Is to basically use your psychokinesis, your PK, to try to get it to move. And so you can use this. An Egley wheel is kind of the same thing. It's actually a built device that you can buy, which is a little more complicated than this. It's not affected by breath or wind or anything like that. So can you use it as a divination tool? You can use it as a form of yes and no. But again, I think that's a very complicated way to try to get an answer, because how you ask the question can very much affect whether or not
that's
you
kind of what
yes
I thought about.
No.
Table tipping sounds like a really complicated way to get an answer.
Wouldn't it be terrible? Yeah, exactly. It's like it's the constant yes and no, and that can be very, very, very time consuming. So, but those are a couple of different options. Another great one that I listed, and I don't have any personal examples, are runes and the I-Ching. Those have been around forever, right?
Yeah.
So,
Qigong or something like that.
No, Qigong is an exercise.
No. There's one that's maybe I don't have the right name for it, but it's all like playing cards, just like poker cards. I didn't bring any poker cards.
Oh, interesting. Cards. No, I don't know I don't know what that is.
You can use poker cards too.
Yeah. The I-Ching was basically the ancient one from China. It was about coins, and each of the letters or the characters has a different type of meaning. Same thing with runes, although that was more a druid type of background there, where each of the runes has a meaning. I used to have runes. I loaned it to somebody, and guess what? Never got it back. So don't loan your tools out.
Yeah.
So I don't have any of those to show anybody. You also mentioned
I don't
earlier.
have runes either. I love runes. I love the concept of them. I don't use them myself. I've used them. I've done like, weird, like clicky things online where you can, like they throw a toss for you and then they can. So that's about the closest as I've got to like an actual real rune.
The problem was for me is the runes never inspired me to any type of intuitive interpretation. The only way I could get anything was if I actually gave the literal. What does this rune mean? That's boring for me. I don't want to just throw a stone or draw a stone for you, read it. To me, that's not helping me develop my abilities. Doesn't mean that it isn't accurate or insightful. It's just not what I would want to use it for, but they are cool. And I like the concept, like you said, behind it. So these are things though, if you resonate with the runes, or if you resonate with the more Eastern type of philosophy of the I-Ching, then those might be things that you might want to work with. They may speak to you at intuitive level that they don't for me or for Sarah, but it's about what resonates with you. It's about what opens up your
I was gonna say I saw because I've watched some different YouTubers do tarot card readings and stuff like that. And a few of them like to use charms and charm bowls. And so they'll have these great big bowls full of just different random charms, and they'll grab a handful and they'll pull them out and they'll do a reading that way.
That's a fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. And so
Yes.
each little charm has its own little meaning, and it's, if it resonates, it resonates. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But
And that's a perfect example. And it actually, here's one of the ones that I really, really love. I have a bowl. And what it is it's full of words. These were actually developed by someone else. This is just loaded with different words. Like this one I drew right here is levity, right? And the one that fell out is worth. And so there's just a single word on each one. And then again, for those that are interested, it comes with a companion book, which I think, again, unfortunately, this is out of print, but you could do this yourself. Each word has a meaning, right? So if I go to that particular word, I can get the literal interpretation. I have my book on my shelf. I don't ever use it because I want to interpret what I've drawn for myself. I generally,
because it might have a different meaning for you.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I will draw my words usually once a week at the beginning of the week, sometimes once a month. It depends. I usually draw however many I feel inspired. It's usually more than one, because as I pick out a series of words, they kind of create a story, right?
Yeah.
I generally don't know what they mean ahead of time. And I always find that by the end of the week or 2 weeks, if I go back and look at my words and I go, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened over the week, right? That absolutely makes sense. So when I drew the words, they didn't make any sense to me. But after I go back from the week and I look at them again, now they've given me kind of, like you said, this sense of validation or this reflection on, oh, now I understand what it means.
Yeah.
So I love
really
my
cool.
Words.
That's
the charms
really cool.
are great.
Yeah.
You could put flowers on here. You could put birds on here. Anything that you wanted to do, you can just create a bowl of whatever it is that inspires you. You could also do a bowl of stones, right? Yes. I mean, I had a girlfriend many, many years ago. I mean, just a bag of stones.
Oh, yeah.
Just tons of stones. And she would actually have people draw stones and then place them on charts based on where they felt important. Okay. So like a chakra chart, or somewhere on your body, like if you draw the body of an outline and you reach in and whatever stone is important to you, put that on that spot on the body or on your chakra where you feel it belongs. Then she would come behind and she would do a reading based on what you had drawn and where you had put it.
So, wow.
I mean,
see, that's
these
exactly
are really
what we're
creative
talking about.
Ways.
About the parameters, like you set up a certain way that you want to have it done, and then you do it. And that's
an experiment. Yeah, it's an experiment. Have fun with it.
You could almost, I mean, I don't know if there's got to be limitations on it, but there's a lot of, it's just open-ended. You could use a million different things.
Exactly. And that's the point. Anything's a psychic tool. Anything's a psychic tool. It's about what resonates with you. But things that make you creative, things that are artful, like stones or charms, they cause you to have an interpretation. They need you to use your creative mind. The creative mind is right next to the psychic mind. Those two run together, because Psi talks to you in signs and symbols. It doesn't talk in this linear fashion like you and I are talking.
I guess when you're doing things like throwing stones, bones, and cards and stuff like that, it leaves it more random to the universe, in my opinion.
It can, yes, true.
Where it's kind of like, okay, universe, tell me what I need to know, and boom, it's like, it's more random that way, it seems like, but then I don't know, because it just depends on what your parameters are. So anything can work. And
you could throw stones and I could throw stones, and you would interpret something out of those stones completely different than I would, because it's going to spark something in me.
Not if it has like a rune has a particular meaning. Well, yes, you can interpret it differently as far as.
Well, I was talking like the charms. Let's say we drew the charms. That's going to inspire you to give one type of reading. It's going to inspire me to give another type of reading, but it doesn't mean both of those wouldn't be accurate.
Well, that's true. Or at least not the same. I don't know. You might have different insights about things than I would. So it could be a still Doesn't mean one would be right or
that's what I'm
wrong.
saying. Yes, right. We could each give. That's why you can go to one psychic. They can tell you one thing, another psychic tells you another one, but both are still accurate. They're just perceiving different bits of information.
Right, right.
So and this was another book I was going to share since we were talking about throwing stones and stuff. Again, I used to manage a bookstore, so I have access to a lot of books.
Oh, no kidding.
This was called the Crystal Wisdom book. And this was all about throwing stones like the ones I showed you in my hand. And then each of them, they had meanings, and you could open up the book and read what the different meanings were. You can also get yourself, a book like this, which tells you what those stones actually mean. If you want to use the literal interpretation, again, I don't like the literal interpretation, but if you do, that's great. Here's another example of some cards where you can throw stones, right? Throw in bones, throw in stones, throw in coins. They land in certain spots. And as they land in a spot, you can give, this one's really cool chart here.
Cool.
And so
that is really cool.
Yeah. So you're drawn to all different kinds of things that you can interpret. Here's another one here with the chakras and different symbols. So you can see that these types of charts are very artsy in nature. Again, they're very interpretive. When you get into that space of being interpretive, of not thinking with a logical linear mind, that's when your own psychic stuff can come in. And so if you want to throw a stone on it or use a pendulum to vibrate to one, again, these are all of these very creative ways that you can use these tools. So
definitely.
You brought up there's tons. I think that's the point of this. You brought us up astrology and numerology, and I don't think people realize that honestly, truly is a divination tool. I mean, people draw charts and get all into all of that type of stuff, looking at the numbers on your name. This can be another modality for people, if you start connecting with numbers or astrology.
Well, and lots of different decks incorporate,
yes, very true. Right.
They incorporate those different things, or it allows for those things to be thrown in there in addition to
correct,
what you're already reading.
So it's great to have a numerology book, maybe on your shelf somewhere, so that if, let's say, for example, you keep seeing a particular number or it's coming up for a particular person and you're not quite sure, you can tell them, go research this number. It has meaning, it has a spiritual meaning for you, or you can look it up for them and give them a literal interpretation as well.
Right.
Very true.
I have some quick ones that I know that to me, this means this and that means that.
Right. Because it could have a personal meaning. That's what I'm saying. Don't use the literal interpretation all the time.
But a lot of times when you get, what people call angel numbers or whatever, and they're like, go ahead and Google it. Sometimes people will Google different answers. So maybe the answer that you got was the answer that you needed.
That you need. Exactly. I think that that's very, very true. Or it's the one that feels right for you and feels significant. So, yeah. Automatic writing, drawing, and art can actually also be a divination type of tool where you're using either a paintbrush or a pen, where you can ask questions. You can actually doodle. It's like, are you connecting with someone and getting shapes? What does that shape mean to you? Do you feel like you need to draw up a scene or a picture? I mean, we may not think of that as a divination tool, but in truth, it is. I've done those as practice exercises. What do you feel like you need to draw for this person? And how do you interpret those drawings? Even if it's nonsensical drawings, it has a meaning for you, and to stick with those. Make sense?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I was going to show you something. Never mind. So that's fine. We talked about palms, bones, tea leaves. Another one that I did, this was another cool exercise I did, is I always tell people, if you're color and you really like color, work with colors. I created this color. I went to the craft store and just got a bunch of different foam ones, cut a hole and put a ring in it. And what happened was I thought, what does this color feel like to me? Right? What does that mean to me psychically? And so it became kind of a personal meaning, kind of a personal library. Okay. And so let's say, for example, then all of a sudden I start seeing this color when I'm connecting with another person, or I ask a question, I can close my eyes and I can say, which color am I drawn to right now? Right. And so then the next thing you know, I go, well, wow, this is the color. that I'm drawn to? Oh, I'm drawn to the exact opposite, which is white. And so
Okay.
what does that mean to me? How does this relate? So again, you can use all kinds of creative things.
Right.
So colors can be done as well. Create something
Right.
for
Right.
yourself that's fun,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
You could.
artsy,
You
that's
could create a
enjoyable.
whole new line of
You
divination
can do,
tool.
that's the whole thing. Create a modality that works for you. Play,
Yes.
practice with your insights, practice with your psychic self, and you might run across something that nobody else has come across. I think animals are a good one
Or
too.
something that works for you. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
There's also an animal, like for example, you can get an animal deck. So if you're a person who loves working with animals and that's the way you want to divine information, this is the book that my guides and I have a contract with. If they give me an animal, they know this is the book I'm going to go to. Right. So if I get given an animal and I keep seeing it, it means I go to this book and that has a meaning for me. That's the contract. I don't go to any other source. And 99.9% of the time, when I really know I'm being hit, I'll go and I'll read it and it provides the clarity that I need. So, in a way, it's kind of a literal interpretation because I'm letting the book define it for me. But you could be,
Right.
you've got a question and you just want to open it up. And oh, I opened it up to the mole. What does mole have to tell me about what I'm going through right now? So, another tool, right?
Right. Right. That makes sense.
There's
And
all,
just what does whole make you think about? Yeah.
yep. And there's also one that's even called Nature Speak that does the same thing with flowers, trees, animal, or insects, because the animal book tends to be more mammals than anything else. So there's tons of different resources out there. Another good one that I thought of is a book or the Bible. And that sounds really funny.
Right.
I have one Bible, just like my power animal book. That's my contract with my guides. This is the only Bible that I use for communication because different Bible versions have different interpretations, right? It's like picking up 4 card decks and each one of them has a different interpretation.
Right.
So this is the Bible that I use. And sometimes it happens, I'll get a Bible and a verse and I'll go look at it. It's exactly what I was going through and told me what I needed to know. And sometimes it really blows me away. So you can use anything you want as a divination tool, including a religious text.
Right. I actually used to do that a lot when I was younger. I would pick up the Bible and be like, what do I need to read? And I would just like hone in on a verse and I'd be like, oh, wow. For whatever reason, it would, be something that I needed to hear and it would help. And
that's not any different than using a card deck. Like you said, it's the energy of the situation that's apparent or something that we don't understand.
Yeah.
It puts 2 and 2 together for you and provides you with those answers. So I guess the point of throwing the Bible in there at the end was saying it doesn't have to be woo-woo. It can be anything that really makes you feel comfortable and that you feel connected with and that allows you to connect with that higher source, whatever you call it.
Absolutely.
Right? God, cosmic
There's
consciousness.
So many different
universe,
ways.
Exactly.
So many different ways.
So don't be afraid of it, but use it for the right reason in the right ways. And take it seriously, but have fun with it. Be willing to make mistakes and so on and so forth.
It's not a joke, but yeah, totally. I get that.